Alright, today's project, real quick, I finally got this up to the shop. It's been sitting for a while, battery wasn't strong enough to get it going. It is electric start only, so I didn't really have a kick option, just had to wait for the battery to charge. But, 81 Sporty, had to re-weld the case on this. The trans grenaded and blew up the left side of the case, well, most of the cases. So all the cases have been re-welded, rebuilt the trans, it's all brand new, thing runs like a top. However, my brake light stopped working on the front, so we're going to blast this apart, try and clean up that switch real quick. I think this is one of those little mini pin ones that constantly go bad. I hate that design. Normally, if I was keeping this, I'd probably throw an inline pressure switch down underneath here. The rear is a pressure switch, which works fine, but these little electronic switches in this cluster, they get covered in brake fluid and crap and grime, and they jam up and get clogged and stop working. So I'm going to try and figure that one out first. Alright, so first thing I got to do is pop this housing apart. Should be Phillips screws. I got one that's mismatched on here, so 3 Phillips, and yeah, these are in there tight. 3 Phillips and 1 flathead up top here. With how tight these housings are and all the wires that are jammed in behind these switches, a lot of times wires can get pinched or shift around, get loose. So if it's any of those, we'll find out real quick here. Okay. That's what we're working with now. Got the switch housing off, so I got the wires that come over the bar. Got start and turn signal switches right here and here on the inside. And then the brake light on this is connected right there. So the orange and red wires. The first thing I want to do is just make sure there's nothing broken or split on these wires going down, which actually look pretty okay visually. A little dirty, but I'll clean all this stuff up while I'm in here. And then I'm going to pull this little boot off and drop this housing down a little bit more. Now, 2 pins on the wires here. Pins are actually in pretty good shape. A little bit of corrosion on one of these too. Hopefully you guys can see that. But it's just a switch. So if I were to click this key on, which I'm going to do right now, bring you guys around to the back, see if this switch is bad. And in order to test that, right now it's just the tail light. But if I jump these 2 wires together, I get brake lights. So the wiring is good. Essentially, jumping these 2 wires together bypasses the switch, closes the circuit. So brake light wiring is good, which is pretty much what I expected. Like I said, these little pin switches in this housing are notorious for going bad. It's terrible design in my opinion. But let me pop that switch out and see what it looks like. The switch on here is super loose in the housing. Oh, that's swell. Loose and broken. I'm going to pull this brake lever off quick. It's got a little E-clip on the bottom pin here. Try not to overbend it or lose this thing. This one's been replaced with a regular little C-clip. And pull this pin out. Lever, washer, spring, all these parts go together. Now, on the front side of this switch, this is the actual switch right here underneath the lever. So when you pull the lever, the switch pops out like it is right now, and the brake light should be on if I click this key on. Obviously the wires aren't hooked up, so that's not going to work right this second. But that's the part I'm going to clean up right now. Make sure that the switch is actually functioning properly. Spray it down to get some of the crap off of it. Let some brake clean soak in there. Make sure the actual switch is pressing in and out like it's supposed to, which now it's doing a lot better just after letting it soak here for a minute. So if your brake light is not working, I know in this case it was working, which is really kind of why I'm thinking that this was just dirty and gummed up, or it was getting stuck and not opening properly. Now I can take these two wires again that I just had out. Just going to quickly jump these together for now. Since we did the test, when I jumped those two wires together and they lit up, it means that the lighting circuit is actually correct. What I'm kind of stuck with now is trying to determine if the switch itself is good or bad. Unfortunately, I do not have one of these switches. So if it is bad, I get to pull this all apart once I order parts, but the order on there doesn't matter either. Like I said, it's just a circuit, so red, black, or red and orange don't really matter. Now if I turn this key back on, bring you guys around back to see the light. And without dropping things, brake light's on. It should be on constantly right now. When I have this wire hooked up, I just disconnected it. There we go. Brake light is on. And when I push this plunger in, it should go off. Brake light was on. On, but it's also on because I'm touching these two posts. Jam this in between here. Off, on. All right. Looks to me like I have a bad switch in here. I know it keeps cycling the brake light on, but it's not. It's just the wires are so close that they're touching. So let me run upstairs. I don't think I have the correct brake light switch, but I can dig around upstairs. I might have one in a bin. I know for sure I have one somewhere, I just don't know where. So I'll dig one out and see what happens. Alright, so these brake light switches, there should be a tab on here that's a little plastic tab to unthread these. This one decided to break as soon as I went to twist on it, and the plastic, the black section of this switch right here is actually broken or separated from the metal section. There we go, now you guys can see. So this switch right here is separated from the metal, like on the actual housing where it threads in, but it's loose, so I'm just going to keep kind of working this out. It's a huge pain. I cannot stress enough how much I dislike this design. It's tucked into the corner of the housing. There's no good way to grab it, especially if the pin breaks off like it did on this one. They're not threaded in there that tight either. It's just kind of inconvenient. I know I might have a new one upstairs. I'm going to check the bins upstairs at the shop. If I don't have one, I don't remember, but I think I might still have one of these in my Super Glide sitting right next to me right now. And on that one I did run a pressure switch. So it's not being used if it's in the housing and the housing's still intact. So good chance I'll be stealing parts off of that bike, since I won't run this switch setup on any of my own bikes that I'm going to ride regularly. When they work fine, but it's just older bikes, especially if they've been leaking or the master cylinders are leaking at all, you just run into problems. Having it right there, it's covered in brake fluid and grime. If it was leaking, in a perfect world, you shouldn't have that problem, but it's never the case, especially when you got old stuff. They're sitting forever. And almost there. Super inconvenient when the actual part of this that I can grab, this plastic part on the end here, is separated from the metal part. Nice pair of little needle nose might help here too, but I broke all of mine. Like I said, this switch is completely busted, so I'm not really worried about it going back in ever. Will get replaced. So I was definitely right on the switch being bad since that came out. I mean, granted, I just mangled it a little, but that was also spinning on its own in the housing. Now I got a spot to grab it. There we go. You got a washer and the actual switch part. So essentially how this works is you have this little plastic button in here. When that gets depressed, you can see how crusty that is on the inside if this will focus. When this gets depressed in, it's stationary. So it's in like this. It's recessed when the brake is off. When you pull the brake, it kicks out. Okay. In this case, that was not working properly or functioning properly. You guys can see the corrosion on the pin itself. This is probably why it wasn't working. But it's busted. Let me see what I got upstairs.